Lusayo was once a happy child, loved dearly by her father, but the moment he took his last breath, her life turned into a nightmare. Mama Jemba, the woman who had once pretended to care for her, showed her true colors. The warmth in their home disappeared, replaced by cold stares and cruel words. Lusayo was stripped of everything, her comfort, her security, and even her dignity. While Bakari ate the finest meals and wore the most expensive clothes, Lusayo barely had enough to survive. She was given old, tattered clothes that barely covered her thin frame. At night, while Bakari slept on a soft bed, Lusayo curled up on the hard kitchen floor, using a sack as a blanket. The cold bit into her skin, but she knew better than to complain. Complaints only led to punishment. Mama Jemba never missed an opportunity to remind Lusayo that she was unwanted. Every morning, before the sun had even risen, Lusayo was dragged out of sleep by the harsh voice of her stepmother. "Get up, you lazy girl. There is work to be done." And so, her days were spent scrubbing floors, washing clothes, and preparing meals she was not allowed to eat. The aroma of roasted meat and fresh bread would fill the air, but Lusayo could only watch as Mama Jemba and Bakari feasted, leaving her with scraps or sometimes nothing at all. But if Mama Jemba's cruelty was bitter, Bakari's torment was even worse. He was not satisfied with simply watching Lusayo suffer. He wanted to see her break. He would trip her while she carried water, laugh as she fell, then blame her for the mess. If she looked too tired, he would find an excuse to punish her, making her scrub the floors all over again. Sometimes, when he was especially cruel, he would throw dirt into the food she had just prepared, only to accuse her of ruining dinner. Mama Jemba would then strike Lusayo, her sharp nails digging into the girl's skin as she shouted, "Ungrateful child, you are lucky I even let you live under my roof." Lusayo never fought back. She bit her tongue, swallowed her pain, and carried on. But every night, as she lay awake on the cold kitchen floor, she wondered if her father would have saved her if he were still alive. Would he have let them treat her this way? Would he have seen the way her once bright eyes had dimmed? But there was no one to save her now, no one to care. Lusayo was alone, trapped in a house where love had long been replaced by cruelty, and the worst was yet to come. The night was dark, and the air inside the small kitchen was heavy with the smell of burning firewood. Lusayo worked as quickly as she could, stirring the pot of stew while wiping sweat from her forehead. Her hands trembled with exhaustion, her body weak from hunger. She knew that if dinner was late, there would be consequences. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. The door burst open with a loud bang, and Bakari stormed in, his face twisted in fury. His footsteps were heavy, filled with anger, and Lusayo's heart pounded in fear. She knew that look. She had seen it before too many times. It always meant pain. "Why is my food not ready?" he barked, his voice sharp like a blade. I'm almost done," Lusayo stammered, keeping her head down. She knew better than to look him in the eyes. That only made him angrier. But Bakari wasn't in the mood to wait. His hunger turned into rage, and in that moment, he wanted to make her suffer. His eyes darted to the fire pit, where the red-hot coals glowed in the darkness. A cruel smile spread across his face. Before Lusayo could react, he reached down and grabbed one of the burning coals. The heat scorched his fingers, but he didn't care. He turned to Lusayo, his eyes burning with hatred. "If you can't see time properly, then maybe you shouldn't see at all," he hissed. Lusayo barely had time to understand his words before he lunged at her. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. Panic surged through her body, but her screams were swallowed by the crackling fire. Then came the pain, blinding, unbearable pain. Bakari pressed the burning coal against her eye, and a blood-curdling scream tore from Lusayo's throat. The heat seared through her skin, melting her flesh, turning her vision into an explosion of agony. She thrashed, her hands clawing at his, but he held her down, his grip unrelenting. Her screams filled the house, echoing through the walls, but no one came to save her. No one stopped him. Mama Jemba stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with cold, empty eyes. She didn't flinch, didn't move. If anything, there was a hint of satisfaction on her face. Tears streamed down Lusayo's face, but they did nothing to soothe the burning. The pain was everywhere, consuming her, drowning her in darkness. Bakari finally let go, shoving her to the ground like a broken doll. Lusayo clutched her face, sobbing, her vision fading into nothingness. The darkness swallowed her whole. Bakari wiped his hands and sneered, looking down at her trembling body. Now you'll know what true suffering is. Mama Jemba said nothing. She simply turned away and walked out, leaving Lusayo writhing on the cold, hard floor. The night had swallowed her screams, but the pain, it would never leave. The night was cold, and the air smelled of damp earth as Bakari and Mama Jemba dragged Lusayo's limp body through the thick forest. She was barely conscious, her face swollen and scarred, her breath weak. Every movement sent sharp pain through her body, but she didn't have the strength to cry out. She could hear the rustling leaves, the distant howls of wild animals, and the cruel whispers of her own family. She's useless now, Mama Jemba muttered. What good is a blind girl? Bakari scoffed. Let the forest take her. She'll be dead by morning. They reached a clearing, and without hesitation, Bakari shoved Lusayo to the ground like discarded trash. Her frail body hit the cold earth, and a sharp pain shot through her ribs. She wanted to move, to beg, to scream, but her voice was lost. Her fingers dug into the dirt, feeling the betrayal, the abandonment, the end. Without another word, they turned and walked away, their footsteps fading into the night. The forest swallowed her whole. Darkness, silence, pain. Lusayo lay there for what felt like eternity. The wind whispered through the trees, the ground cold beneath her broken body. Her breathing was slow, each inhale a struggle. She thought of her father, of the warmth he once gave her. She wanted to cry, but even her tears had abandoned her. Then, through the silence, there was a sound, a soft shuffle, the crackling of twigs. Someone was there. A rough, calloused hand touched her forehead. Still breathing, a deep voice murmured. The scent of herbs and smoke surrounded her, and then everything faded to black. When Lusayo awoke, she was inside a small hut. The air was thick with the smell of healing oils, dried leaves hanging from the ceiling. A fire crackled nearby, casting a faint warmth over her cold skin. She could hear the slow, steady movements of an old man. Drink, the voice said, pressing a wooden bowl to her lips. The liquid was bitter, but the warmth spread through her body, numbing the pain. Days turned into weeks. The old man, Baba Nyoka, nursed her back to life. He cleaned her wounds, applied strange pastes that soothed the burning, and fed her nourishing broths. Lusayo never saw his face, but she felt his kindness. Her world was now nothing but darkness, but Baba Nyoka refused to let her wallow in despair. You are not weak, child, he said one day. You have lost one sight, but the world has given you another. At first, Lusayo didn't understand, but as days passed, she began to listen. She heard the rustling leaves, the way the wind whispered secrets through the trees. She could tell when Baba Nyoka was near, simply by the scent of his herbs. Slowly, she learned to move without sight, to trust her instincts, to feel the world in ways she never had before. Baba Nyoka was no ordinary healer. He was a man of deep wisdom, keeper of old secrets. He spoke of energy, of unseen forces, of power hidden within those who have suffered. Pain is a teacher, he told her, and you, my child, are meant for something greater. With every lesson, Lusayo felt herself growing stronger. She was no longer the weak, helpless girl who had been tossed away like garbage. Something inside her was changing, something powerful. She didn't know it yet, but the day would come when she would return, not as a victim, but as a force that would shake the very ground beneath Bakari and Mama Jemba's feet. Lusayo sat cross-legged on the floor of Baba Nyoka's hut, her hands resting on her lap, her ears attuned to every sound in the small space. The old healer had been silent for a long time, stirring a pot over the fire, his mind deep in thought. She had grown used to the quiet, but tonight, something felt different. The air was heavier, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. Then, Baba Nyoka finally spoke. Lusayo, he said, his voice grave yet calm. There is something you must know. She tilted her head, listening. You are not an ordinary girl. You never were. Lusayo frowned. What do you mean? Baba Nyoka moved closer and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Your blood carries the gift of the Nyanza seers, he said, a rare lineage of women who, though blind to the world, can see far beyond what normal eyes perceive. Lusayo felt a shiver run through her. See? She echoed. But I cannot. You can, Baba Nyoka interrupted, but not with your eyes. The seers of Nyanza were feared and respected because they could sense truths hidden from others. They could hear the past whispering through the wind, feel the weight of unspoken lies, and even catch glimpses of what is yet to come. Lusayo's breath hitched. It sounded impossible, and yet She had started noticing things. The way she could tell when Baba Nyoka was troubled, even when he said nothing. The way she could sense a change in the air before a storm arrived. The way she sometimes felt a shiver of warning just before something bad happened. Your stepmother and stepbrother thought they blinded you, Baba Nyoka continued. But in their cruelty, they awakened something far more powerful. Lusayo swallowed, her fingers curling into her lap. How do I use it? Baba Nyoka chuckled softly. Patience, child. The gift is strong, but it must be trained. Over the next few weeks, Baba Nyoka put her through rigorous training. She sat for hours in silence, focusing on the sounds around her. Every crackle of the fire, every shift in the wind, every heartbeat of the earth beneath her feet. She learned to sense emotions, to know when someone was speaking a lie even if their words were sweet. Then, one night, everything changed. She was meditating, lost in the darkness that had become her new world, when suddenly she saw something, not with her eyes, but with her mind. It was a flicker, a glimpse of something that had already happened. She saw Mama Jemba, standing in her father's room, holding a small bottle, tipping something into his drink. Lusayo gasped, her eyes snapping open. She was shaking, her breath uneven. Baba Nyoka was already by her side. What did you see? He asked, his voice steady. Lusayo swallowed hard. My father, she whispered. Mama Jemba, she poisoned him. Baba Nyoka nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. The truth is revealing itself to you, he said. This is only the beginning. Lusayo's heart pounded. She had spent so long thinking she was powerless, but now she was starting to understand. She had not been blinded. She had been given a different kind of sight, and with it, she would uncover every dark secret, every hidden lie. She was no longer just a helpless girl. She was something far greater. The sun hung low over Zamoro as Lusayo stepped onto the dusty path leading into the village. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and ripe fruit from the market, but a hush seemed to follow her wherever she walked. Villagers paused mid-conversation, eyes widening in shock as they recognized her. Is that Lusayo? A woman whispered, clutching her basket of yams. But she was blind. She was left for dead, another man murmured, his voice laced with disbelief. Lusayo ignored their gasps and stares. She moved forward with steady, deliberate steps, her long robes flowing around her like the rippling waters of a river. A wooden staff, carved with ancient symbols, tapped lightly against the ground as she walked. Her face bore the scars of her past, burned but unbroken. And though her eyes no longer saw the world as they once had, they now held a depth that made those who dared meet her gaze shiver. She had not come for their pity. She had come for justice. News of her return spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of Mama Jemba and Bakari before she even reached the center of the village. Inside their grand house, Bakari scoffed at the rumors, but his fingers trembled against the goblet he held. Mama Jemba, however, was not so dismissive. Her eyes darted around, her mind racing. How is she alive? She hissed, pacing back and forth. She's nothing, Bakari spat. She can't see. What can a blind girl do? But Mama Jemba's gut told her otherwise. A girl abandoned to die should not have returned with such strength, such presence. And those robes, they were not ordinary. Outside, the crowd gathered, villagers whispering among themselves, unsure whether to approach Lusayo or flee. Then, she stopped in front of the house she once called home. Lifting her chin, she spoke, her voice calm but commanding. Bakari, Mama Jemba, I have returned. The door swung open. Bakari stood tall, arrogance still etched into his features, but the smirk he tried to wear faltered when Lusayo's sightless eyes locked onto him. You should not have come back, he said, his voice quieter than he intended. Lusayo tilted her head. I was never meant to return, she said, and yet, here I am. A gust of wind rushed through the village, carrying a whisper only she could hear. It was the sound of buried secrets stirring, the truth clawing its way to the surface. Zamoro had no idea what was coming. The village square was packed. Men, women, and children gathered, their faces filled with curiosity and unease. The air buzzed with murmurs, but as Lusayo stepped forward, a hush fell over the crowd. She stood tall, her hands gripping the staff that had guided her back to Zamoro. The elders sat in a row before her, their expressions unreadable, while Chief Otieno leaned forward, studying her closely. I have returned to reveal a hidden truth, Lusayo declared, her voice steady and clear. A truth that will change everything. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Some villagers glanced at one another, unsure if they should believe her. Others watched with fascination. From the front, Bakari burst into laughter. Listen to her. A blind girl who speaks of truth. What does she see? The darkness in her own mind. His voice dripped with mockery, and a few villagers chuckled nervously. Mama Jemba smirked beside him, arms crossed. Child, you should have stayed in the forest. You speak nonsense. But Lusayo remained calm. She lifted her hands slowly, palms facing the sky. The moment she did, an unnatural stillness swept through the village. The rustling of leaves ceased. The wind that had been blowing moments ago disappeared, and even the sounds of the distant river seemed to fade. A shiver ran through the crowd. Chief Otieno's eyes narrowed. Lusayo took a deep breath, then spoke. You think I am blind, but I see clearer than any of you. I see the past. I see the lies. And I see the darkness hidden behind smiles. The villagers stiffened. Something in her voice, an ancient weight, a power beyond human understanding, made their hearts pound. I see the hands that stole from the village, Lusayo continued, her face turning toward Bakari. I see the lips that spoke false words to the chief, and I see the blood that was spilled in secret. Bakari's smirk faltered. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. I see the night my father died, Lusayo said, her voice suddenly sharper, louder. And I know who was there. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mama Jemba's face drained of colour. Bakari's fists clenched. Lusayo turned her head slightly, as if looking into a world only she could see. The villagers held their breath. The silence stretched. And then, the truth began to unravel. The village square fell into stunned silence. The revelation had struck like a lightning bolt, shaking the very ground beneath them. All eyes turned to Chief Otieno, whose face twisted in confusion and fury. His gaze darted between Lusayo, Bakari, and Mama Jemba, searching for an answer that would make sense of this madness. Bakari, who had stood tall moments ago, now looked lost. "This is a lie!" he shouted, his voice shaky. "She is just a blind girl, a cursed girl. How can you believe her words?" But Lusayo did not waver. She stepped forward, gripping her staff. "You tried to blind me to bury the truth, but you only made me see clearer. My soul remembers what my eyes could not, and I am not alone in this truth." At that moment, Baba Nyoka emerged from the crowd. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, his aged eyes filled with wisdom. In his hands he held an old cloth bundle, carefully wrapped and preserved. He stopped before Chief Otieno and extended it toward him. "I have the proof," Baba Nyoka said, his voice carrying the weight of time itself. The chief's hands trembled as he took the bundle and unwrapped it. Inside lay 2 small baby bracelets. One, a delicate gold band with the royal emblem. The other, a simple beaded string, the kind worn by common village children. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Lusayo took a deep breath. "I was born into this home. I am your true child, Chief Otieno. But Mama Jemba, out of greed, stole me away and replaced me with Bakari. She raised me as a servant, while he lived as a prince." All colour drained from Mama Jemba's face. Her lips parted, but no words came. The truth she had buried for years now stood before her, undeniable and damning. Chief Otieno's hands tightened around the bracelets, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He turned to Mama Jemba, his eyes dark with fury. "Is this true?" His voice was dangerously low. Mama Jemba took a step back, her body trembling. I did what I had to do," she stammered. "I wanted security. I wanted a life where I would never be cast aside like a forgotten widow. Enough!" Chief Otieno roared, his voice echoing through the square. "You stole my child. You stole my blood. And then you burned her eyes to keep your secret hidden." The villagers erupted in shock, their voices rising in outrage. Some turned to Bakari, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others stepped away from Mama Jemba, as if her sins could stain them too. Bakari stumbled, his confidence shattered. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "I swear, I didn't know." But his voice faded, lost in the rising tide of judgment. Lusayo stood strong, her blind eyes unseeing but more powerful than any sighted gaze. "Justice will decide your fate," she said, her voice steady. "But the truth can no longer be hidden." The truth had been revealed, and now there would be consequences. Bakari's face twisted in terror as he saw the rage in the villager's eyes. His entire life had been built on a lie, and now that lie was crumbling around him. He took a desperate step back, his mind racing for a way out. Then, without warning, he turned and ran. But the villagers were faster. Hands reached out, grabbing his arms, yanking him back. "You will not escape your fate," an elder declared. "For years, you lived as a prince while the true daughter of this land suffered." Bakari struggled, his breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't ask for this," he pleaded, but his words fell on deaf ears. Meanwhile, Mama Jemba fell to her knees, her hands clutching the ground as if she could hold on to her crumbling world. Tears streamed down her face. "Chief Otieno, please," she sobbed. "I did it for us, for our family. I only wanted to protect us." Lusayo stepped forward, her presence commanding, her blind eyes fixed on the woman who had tormented her for years. "You did it for yourself," she said, her voice calm but full of unshakable strength. "You stole my life. You made me suffer. You burned my eyes to hide your sins. But now, the truth burns you instead." The villagers murmured in agreement, shaking their heads at Mama Jemba's disgrace. Once she had been a respected woman, the wife of a chief, a mother of a supposed prince. Now, she was nothing more than a liar, exposed before the entire village. Chief Otieno's hands clenched into fists, his eyes filled with pain and fury. "You stole my daughter from me," he said through gritted teeth. "You betrayed not just me, but this entire village. You will not remain among us." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Exile, the worst punishment of all. Bakari's legs gave out beneath him. "No, no, please. I have nowhere to go. I'll have nothing." His voice cracked with desperation. Mama Jemba crawled toward Chief Otieno, her hands trembling. "Please, my husband, my love, I have been your wife for so many years. Don't throw me away like this." But the chief's face was stone. "You threw yourself away the day you took my child." The decision was final. The villagers stepped back, forming a path leading out of Zamoro, a path that Bakari and Mama Jemba had no choice but to walk. As they stumbled forward, humiliated and broken, Lusayo whispered, "You made me blind, but now the world sees the truth." The villagers, who had once turned away from her suffering, now looked upon her with awe and respect. She was no longer the orphaned servant girl, no longer the outcast. She was a woman of power, of wisdom, of destiny. And as Bakari and Mama Jemba disappeared into the horizon, Lusayo stood tall, knowing that this was only the beginning of her true journey. Tears glistened in Chief Otieno's eyes as he stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for Lusayo. The moment his arms wrapped around her, the weight of lost years crushed him. "My daughter, my child, I failed you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The villagers watched in silence, some bowing their heads in shame. They had turned their backs on Lusayo when she needed them most, believing the lies spun by Mama Jemba. Now they saw the truth. Lusayo was not only the chief's true daughter, but a woman of strength, wisdom, and unshakable spirit. Servants rushed to adorn her in royal robes, eager to wash away the years of mistreatment, but Lusayo gently pushed them away. "I do not seek riches or fine clothes," she said. "I have seen the world beyond sight, and I have learned that true power does not come from gold or status. It comes from wisdom, from helping those who cannot help themselves." The villagers whispered among themselves. Most expected Lusayo to take her place in the palace, to reclaim the life stolen from her, but she had other plans. She turned to Baba Nyoka, the old healer who had saved her life. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her with quiet pride. "You gave me a new life when the world abandoned me," Lusayo said. "Now I will continue your work. I will use my gift not for revenge, but to heal, to guide, to protect." And so, instead of living as a princess, Lusayo became something far greater. People from distant lands traveled to Zamoro, seeking the woman who could hear the whispers of the past and see the hidden truths of the future. She healed the sick, guided the lost, and exposed the wicked. In time, she became known as the Seer of Zamoro, a name that would be spoken with reverence for generations to come. The years were not kind to Bakari and Mama Jemba. Cast out from Zamoro with nothing but the clothes on their backs, they wandered from village to village, begging for food and shelter. But word had spread far and wide about their wickedness. No matter where they went, doors were shut in their faces, and curses followed them like shadows. Once Bakari had been a man who thrived on power, feared by those around him. Now, he was nothing more than a broken soul, his body frail from hunger, his spirit crushed by shame. He no longer walked with the arrogance that once defined him. Instead, he staggered, his eyes hollow, his voice weak as he pleaded for mercy from those he had once considered beneath him. Mama Jemba fared no better. The woman who had once ruled the household with cruelty now found herself living in constant fear. She could no longer manipulate, no longer deceive. Her lies had been exposed, and the world had turned against her. The weight of her sins bore down on her shoulders, leaving her hunched and defeated. As they roamed the land, Bakari and Mama Jemba realized that they were truly alone. No family, no home, no redemption. Hunger gnawed at them like a beast, and the cold nights offered no comfort. The same suffering they had once inflicted on Lusayo had come back to them tenfold. Meanwhile, Lusayo's name grew into something greater than a legend. Travelers from distant lands spoke of the blind girl who had seen beyond sight, who had exposed the wicked and brought justice to Zamoro. Her story was told around fires at night, inspiring those who had suffered, giving hope to the broken. Many sought her wisdom, believing that she held the power to see the truth hidden within hearts. And though Lusayo had every reason to be consumed by hatred, she never spoke of revenge. Instead, she lived in peace, healing the wounded, guiding the lost, and ensuring that no one suffered as she once had. And so, fate dealt its final hand. The wicked had been stripped of everything, left to wander the earth as shadows of their former selves. But Lusayo, the girl they had tried to destroy, had risen above them all, her name forever etched in history as the one who saw the truth and destroyed the wicked with it. Imagine a world where justice always finds its way, where the innocent rise and the wicked fall. Lusayo's story is proof that no matter how much darkness surrounds you, the light of truth will always shine through. She was left for dead, blinded by cruelty, but she refused to be broken. Instead, she became stronger, wiser, and more powerful than those who tried to destroy her. But think about this. How many Lusayos are out there right now? How many people suffer in silence, betrayed by those they trust the most? How many are waiting for justice, for truth to be revealed? If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel the pain of the innocent and the power of justice, then don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let the world know that no evil goes unpunished and that true strength comes from within. Like this video, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring tale. Thank you for watching. Your support keeps these stories alive.